Check. I request the audience to settle down. We're starting shortly. All set. Check. Ready? Yeah? All right. Welcome back, everybody. I hope everybody had a good lunch. Before we proceed, I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to all our sponsors, without whose support this event would not be possible. A huge thank you to East India Udyog Limited and Indorama Ventures for being our biggest supporters and the platinum sponsors of this event. I would also like to thank our in-kind sponsors, CGF, Vadam Teas, and PepsiCo, and our other sponsors, the Babson Graduate Student Council, the Babson Institute of Family Entrepreneurship, Babson Diversity and Inclusion, Office of the President, thank you, and the Graduate Dean's Office for their kindness and support. I'm actually personally very excited for our next session. At Babson, a large part of the cohort start up or want to start our own businesses. Startups are key drivers of change, not just in the way business is done, but also of the economy. They create and provide jobs to the constantly evolving workforce while slowly changing the world. One could argue that startups are going to play one of the most important roles in helping reach that 5 trillion mark and maybe beyond. However, to learn the role about startups and India's startup ecosystem, that's the first place to start. We have a panel of 4 very, very exciting speakers. I'm going to go in that order. First up is Mr. ANKUR WARIKOO. ANKUR is an entrepreneur, angel investor, public speaker, and the co-founder and former CEO of Nearby.com, a hyper-local e-commerce company based in India, which helps shoppers to discover and buy from merchants near them. He has also previously served as the CEO of Groupon in India, where he set up Groupon's India practice. He also co-founded Accentrium Web, which owns and operates several websites in the Indian consumer space. As you may have noticed, the entrepreneurial spirit runs deep within him, and he's going to share how he made that all happen. Next, we have Mr. Ankit Mehta, the co-founder and CEO at IdeaForge. Ankit co-founded IdeaForge in 2007, and IdeaForge is India's largest manufacturer of drones for defense, homeland security, and industrial applications. IdeaForge is a pioneer in research, development, production, and operation of compact, cost-effective, and user-friendly unmanned aerial vehicles in India. His organization has multiple IPs to his credit, including the then world's lightest autopilot in 2009. Ankit has won a lot of awards for himself and the organization, one of them being the MRIGANK Innovation Foundation Award and the Best Product Design Company by IESA. An innovator at heart, he loves to solve problems and believes in implementing the right solution, no matter the origin. Then we have Mr. Rohit Kapoor, who we met earlier today. Almost everybody may have heard or might have stayed at Oyo Hotel. Oyo is the world's second largest chain of operated hotels, homes, managed living and workspaces present in 80 countries and is one of the world's fastest growing companies. An ISB alumnus, Rohit Kapoor is the Chief Executive Officer, India and South Asia at Oyo. Rohit is responsible for driving new real estate businesses for Oyo, exploring new domains and categories, and other strategic initiatives both in India and across international markets. Prior to joining Oyo, Rohit was a consultant with McKinsey & Company for close to a decade. Rohit also serves on the board of Antra Senior Living, Maximum Distribution, and Crossley Remedies. Last but definitely not the least, we have Mr. MRIGANK Singh, who's going to be moderating and speaking in this discussion. MRIGANK is currently the CEO of the Atal Incubation Center at the Indian School of Business and heads the practice of entrepreneurship and innovation at ISB Mohali. MRIGANK Singh has been instrumental in shaping the drone policy of India and the beyond visual line of sight experiments. He has been a member of various high-level committees formed by the Ministry of Civil Aviation, GOI, such as Committee on Airspace Management, US Task Force, Committee on Design, Development and Production of Civil Unmanned Aerial Vehicles, BVLOS Experiment Assessment and Monitoring Committee, or BEAM, BVLOS Committee. MRIGANK also founded SensePert Solutions, an unmanned aerial systems company, pioneering in aerial data-based analytics and decision support systems, and 5i Technology, technology-driven company focusing on smart city infrastructure. We are really excited to have all of them here and what promises to be a power-packed session. Please give them all a very warm welcome.
Thank you, Gaurav, for such a kind and elaborate introduction, and I'm really grateful for that. So, even before we start the panel, I would like to throw in some numbers like all the MBAs do. So, in last 5 years, India has produced around 9,300 startups, and 1,300 of them were just last year. We have given world 24 unicorns, and 7 of them were produced just last year. India is known to be the third, most vibrant startup ecosystem in the world today after China and US. But there is a gap. When India produces those 24 unicorns, China and US produces 200. So this is the gap. And now my question to the panel is India poised to bridge that gap? Have we reached that inflection point where we will start accelerating to bridge that gap? Ankur, I would like to start with you and give your opening comments, and maybe you can also share your nearby journey with it.
Sure. Thank you. Firstly, Babson, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. It's my first time, not just at Babson, but at Boston. So I'm thoroughly enjoying the cold. It reminds me of, I'd forgotten what North winters are in the US, and I started at Michigan, so I'm very starkly reminded of what it is now. I wasn't meant to be an entrepreneur. I was a PhD student at Michigan State University doing a specialization in astrophysics, wanting to get into NASA and become a space scientist. And then life changed. I decided to drop out of it and come back to India, and my world was just completely perplexed. Like, what is wrong with you? Who drops out of education as an Indian student? And this is 2002, so dropping out of, like, today when I say that I'm a PhD dropout, people are like, oh my God, that's so awesome, because everyone we know who's done something in life has dropped out of something. So there must be really something good with you, but back then it wasn't, and I was completely clueless, very confused what to do with life, and my friends were like, look, you're confused, so why don't you do what most confused people do? Go get an MBA. So I went to ISB with Rohit, and one serendipitous evening with a batchmate of mine, he was like, hey, I've started up a venture and I wanted to talk to you about it. And I'm like, sure, what's it called? And he was like, it's called secondshadi.com. Shadi is the Hindi word for marriage, so it's secondmarriage.com. And I was like, is it what I think it is? And he's like, yeah, man, it's a matrimonial website for remarriages. And I was like, that is such a brilliant idea. How did you think about that? It's like, no, my dad thought about this. And I was like, okay, first up, I hope your parents are having a happy marriage, but is there a way that I can help? And I was a consultant back then. I was thoroughly enjoying my time, for the first time getting real life experience. And in 2009, I became an entrepreneur. And back then, becoming an entrepreneur was nearly not as cool as sexy as it is today. Now, it just essentially meant that most likely you didn't get a job out of college, and that's why you started up on your own. No disrespect meant to anyone who starts up after Babson. And after 10 years, I stand here today as an absolute irrational optimist, saying that that time has come, to the question that you asked, MRIGANK. I feel what's happened in India that has already happened in US and China is that we've seen a round and a wave of first-time entrepreneurs that started post-liberalization that have done exceedingly well for themselves and are now posed as both investors and mentors and community builders in the entire ecosystem. So what is happening now is entrepreneurship is being encouraged by people who had entrepreneurship as an experience for the last 20 years, have done exceedingly well, have stories to tell. There is massive survivorship bias, yes, but these are fascinating stories that we are getting to live. And I feel that there is an entire generation that is now being encouraged to think of it as a legitimate profession that could also get you married as a biodata point, and is not just something cool. It is genuinely a way to add value and create wealth, not just for yourself but for stakeholders. And I think the entire 2015 oddish change around the internet penetration through Reliance Jio made it possible for literally every Indian to be touched by technology in ways that never happened before. So I stand here as a proud representative of the Indian startup ecosystem, just as my other panelists, and I genuinely believe because of this first run of success that's happened, we're now going to witness several decades of the startup industry becoming, perhaps in my opinion, the same role that the IT industry played post liberalization for 30 odd years, where it was the key job producing phenomena. I see the startup industry doing that in India.
So you are saying we have both the social capital and the infrastructure to have a vibrant startup ecosystem.
I believe so, and I think more. It's not that we lacked it in a way that couldn't have helped us so far, but what I feel is that there is conviction in the mindset of individuals that I can also now do it, whether with the government or despite the government, or with the infrastructure or despite the infrastructure. And there are enough cases where people have literally taken the bull by its horns and saying, now, if this is not available for me as a country, I will make this happen because I have the wherewithal and the conviction to make that happen. And Oyo is a great story around that.
So yeah, coming to Rohit. So if yes, if one thing has scaled up in India, like if only one startup we can say has scaled up in India, it's Oyo that way. So my question to you is that scaling up in India, what were the challenges and the opportunities which you saw in the Indian ecosystem when you were scaling up? And do you think, because you have been working in Southeast Asia, also representing your country, your company, so do you, how other Southeast Asian economies are placed in terms of the scale up support?
So, first of all, I think several startups scaled up. Flipkart did, Ola did, we did. So we have a good company there. I personally believe that the opportunity that the Indian market presents is just so large. If you go into very core, deep demand segments, and people often ask the question, so what's happened? How could these companies scale up so quickly or do stuff? And the core of it is actually very simple. The core of it is talent now wants to work with these kind of companies, right? If you think about India in the 90s or mid 90s, if you're a fantastic B school or engineering college, HUL or one of the FMCG companies was the place to go. Then it became consultancies. At brief period of time for 5 years was iBanks. If in 2005 you did a poll on campus and said, "Do you really want to work for a taxi company?" Maybe not, right? Budget hurdles, no chance, right? Do you want to deliver like pizzas home? Are you excited about that? No chance. So I think what has happened is delivering into large markets through technology has become a very attractive destination for top talent. And to me, that's the single biggest source of scale up, because you're able to get leadership and talent depth, which is solving such fundamental problems with a very different lens. That's one. In terms of other markets, I think look, they're equally not maybe at the same scale, but Indonesia is a very large market. Malaysia is a large market. Entire Southeast Asia is a very vibrant market. And remember that while their scale may not be that much, the per capita income in those markets is several years ahead of India still. So dollar value of those markets are still very large. I think it's happening everywhere. I'm particularly excited about the fact that Indian parents are finally accepting that being in business and starting up is a good thing, and people are encouraging people to sort of try it out. So I agree. Warikoo and I were same class at ISB, and I don't think there were too many people at that time even who were so clear about getting into a startup mode. Today, if you go to ISB, I think 30% of the class just wants to start up on their own, at least, if not more.
So what are your thoughts about access to capital? Like, yes, we have $60 billion parked in the country to be invested, and last year we invested $4.4 billion in different startups. But in my opinion, as when I run the accelerator, I find that early stage access to capital is really limited. What are your views on that?
Look, I think there's one startup out of India which nobody talks about, which is the most well-funded startup in the world. It's Geo.
Really?
Check the balance sheet, you'll know what I'm talking about, right? It's public, right? It's the most phenomenal startup to emerge, which has completely disrupted an existing industry completely upside down. And that's fascinating how that was done. Now, since it came from an established business house, nobody talks about it, right?
It has access to capital. What about the other people who don't?
So access to capital is not the problem anymore. Look, also these are phases. So the world over the last 10, 15 years has seen a cycle of cheap capital available globally, which is unprecedented for the last 50 years, right? And that cycle is slowing down right now a little bit. So we have to be cautious about extrapolating the last 10 years trend into the future. Having said that, if I continue to accept the fact that that will continue for some more time, Japan will have negative yields, US will continue to do well, because for the last 3 years everybody's talking about that when will US topple over. It's almost like when rather than whether, and it hasn't done that. The economy has gone from strength to strength, and that's really benefited other markets in terms of access to capital. Access to capital is today not available so much to the idea as it to the person. That's a very big change that's happening. Ideas are everywhere. People who can execute those ideas and get meaningful returns on capital are very few. So for those people and their profile sketches, we are starting to emerge on what characteristics those people possess. Capital is not a constraint anymore.
Okay. Point taken. So Ankit, you started a manufacturing startup in a regulated space in 2007 and became the topmost drone manufacturer of India. Do you think that Indian ecosystem is positioned well enough to support startups, hardware startups which can scale? Do you see this next $100 billion Tesla coming out of India? And while explaining this, also walk us through your idea for journey as well.
Sure. So to give you guys a 30,000 feet view of what I did. Basically used to be a tinkerer in college. I used to go to my professors, ask for money to implement my own ideas. One of those ideas happened to be making a drone, and in 2004 we built our first drone. And we were meandering with the technology till 2008 when we participated in a competition with IIT Bombay, and we came first alongside MIT US, and that was everyone's eyes around us opened up that there's a company in India which can actually develop technology from scratch at this level. And that got us the real entry into the drones market, but we were still like fiddling around with the tech. We weren't really focused or doing anything for anything else. But in 2008, when the 26/11 attacks happened in Mumbai, is when my team sat down and we realized that we actually had a tech that could have helped our forces at that time, because it was a siege. Literally, some of the facilities were on a siege, and there was this lack of information. There was this lack of ability to coordinate a lot of things, and that we really felt that we had a tech. If it was ready, it would have helped. And that's what pushed us into building drones commercially. And in 2009, we launched India's first fully autonomous micro drone. And in 2010, we made our first sale of a drone. Before that, we were selling our autopilots to the labs in DRDO who felt that we have a tech that they didn't have access to otherwise. So that's the brief overview. And then since then, we've been building this for our forces. Pretty much 80-90% of what our Indian forces use as Indian tech in this space is ours, and we've been part of almost all of the key missions around this area in the country. We've been part of the Uttarakhand disaster, the Nepal earthquake. We were a part of used during the floods that happened recently in the south of India. We were part of several terror attacks where they wanted to sanitize the area post the attack. Have actually identified insurgents or terrorists with arms, and they've been able to run missions successfully against them. So a lot of active operations happen around our systems. We've done over 130,000 missions with our end customers with our products right now. Trained over 1,500 people in their organizations to operate our systems. So it's been an exciting journey. In terms of tech, in hardware, we're second to none globally in what we build, which is again something to be proud of as an Indian company. And that's where I lead into your question: that is India poised? I think yes, India is poised. I don't think we create technology which is second to anyone right now globally. Look at Ather Energy, right? Their scooter is top of the line when it comes to, and I've sat on the scooter and it is exhilarating. I'm sure that's the feeling you get when you sit on a Model S, right? I mean, it's just, and it's very exciting. It's very exciting, and I don't think India needs to ape anybody else. I think India needs to solve its own problems, and I think if you solve problems in India for India, you're actually creating a more scalable version of the technology that will actually do well globally. Like, imagine in India we have all kinds of possible terrains that you can imagine in the world. We have the highest altitudes to cater to in the world, right? I mean, I have to build drones which can fly from sea level all the way up to 5,000 meters, 6,000 meters takeoff. I have to build drones that can survive from minus 20, 30 to all the way up to 55 degrees centigrade of temperature. I have to build systems which can actually survive on the worst roads you can possibly imagine in the world. So there isn't, and of course, operate in marshy environment, operate in hilly areas. So you have basically the ingredients to build extremely capable technology in India. In fact, any technology that you optimize in our country, the kind of density our cities have, the kind of population, the kind of chaos we have around us, it's actually an opportunity to build technology that can genuinely have a significantly easier run in the rest of the world. So I do believe that if we take it upon ourselves to create these products, we will create the ability to scale them globally. Yes, we have to have a global mindset while building them. That I think is really, really important, because India may not be the best consumer of technology at the early on. At the early onset, it may not be the best consumer, but building it there, I think it's a great, great opportunity.
First of all, I think product entrepreneurs will be forever grateful to people like you who sort of started this 10 years back. It's just mind blowing to even think of that. I just wanted to sort of build on what you said and add to it. So whenever people think of, and there's a question we often get asked in India saying, what is the difference between Bangalore and Silicon Valley, let's say? And if I may draw your attention to a small island called Galapagos, right, where Darwin did his experiments in terms of survival of the fittest. One of the core reasons why all kinds of flora and fauna exist on that island is because it's got the perfect environment to survive for everyone. The right temperature, the right balance of soil, the right everything. I think Silicon Valley has that for entrepreneurship. India is yet to have that. And that goes back to a very fundamental problem in our education system back there, which is we are not taught to be curious. We are taught to give answers, not ask questions. Right? And that's a fundamental issue with education system which needs to correct over time for us to be comfortable with not knowing. Right? The moment that happens and you have a lot of people who are comfortable with not knowing and continuing to ask the question, which are deep in nature, the ecosystem develops and it's a very virtuous cycle which develops, because then you don't get judged for doing the wrong thing. You don't get judged for failure. So it's a long journey. I think we are at a very, very early starting point of building an ecosystem of that nature. It's getting there, but it's still way off. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, when I started, my company, there was zero access to capital. In fact, I was like, the odd man out in every event I went to, because nobody was doing hardware at that time. And in 2007, doing it on my own with very little support from the ecosystem, it was very hard at that time. Now, today, I actually see that there is a decent access to capital. Significantly less mature ideas have have had access to capital as compared to what we had to do. We had to literally prove ourselves at every step of the way that yes, it's possible. It's possible to create it here, and only then did we get the capital to actually build something on top of that. But today I think is a great opportunity, and a lot has to mature yet. A lot has to mature. He's absolutely right, because we don't have that mindset ab initio in our country to take those kind of plunges and support that kind of environment and industry.
But as I observed that there are a lot of new organic market, billion-dollar market, which are created in India very often. Like you have e-commerce, re-commerce, hyperlocal, hospitality. You have these markets which are naturally generated. So, Rohit, my question to you is that do we see a Tesla coming up in India, or do we see a 100 OYO scaling up to $100 billion? Like, because this it's just to make you happy.
I'll refer to the food panel discussion. आपके मुंह में घी शक्कर. Like, I hope what you say comes true. I'll be personally very grateful for that.
So you
But,
can write the check for the acceleration center.
But I think, do I see a Tesla coming out of India? Honest answer, no. Right? Not for some time. Yeah, but services-led markets, deep consumer demand-led markets. So, for example, as a very strange paradox, I was talking to someone. I said, one of the biggest opportunity creators in India for new businesses have been bad traffic. Right? It's just a godsend for new businesses, because everyone wants everything at home, and with that core assumption and payment systems and internet growing and mobile growing, you suddenly disrupted almost all real estate based industries, almost all. So, for example, if I were to bet $1 in healthcare today in India, I will bet on healthcare at home. Home health. It's just so painful to get out and go somewhere and park your car and do stuff. So service-led markets will become very large and very deep. Product-led markets still, I think Ankit will be probably better positioned to answer this question, but from my vantage point, I still see some struggle there.
We can have some disagreement in the panel also.
Building a Tesla out of India.
Yeah, I think it'll take time. It will take time because the market, yeah, market maturity, I think is it's not yet there, in the sense that the demand from the consumer isn't the paying capacity of the consumer also isn't suddenly changing overnight. So it's going to take time for it to happen for India. But can it happen for the rest of the world in terms of delivering and creating something for the rest of the world? I think it's definitely an opportunity if you do the right thing.
It's a matter of time. I'm just saying that it'll take a little more time for conditions to mature and those businesses to come out of India. They will for sure. It's not in the near future, maybe in the next few years.
And to that point, my biggest learning as an entrepreneur in the B2C space has been the fact that India is a trust deficient country. We don't trust people easily. We have been trained to believe कि दाल में कुछ काला है. There's something wrong opposite. We're trained that the person opposite to us is trying to get the best of us. And there, it is harder for something which is an involved business to start just out of nowhere. And that's why we as an Indian consumer base are ready to buy anything which has TATA attached to it. Like we'll buy salt from Tata, we'll buy houses from Tata, we'll fly their airline, we'll send our kids to that school, we'll do everything, because what it has done over years is just built insane trust. When you look at a market such as US or Europe, which are largely trust-driven markets, anyone who says, I'm an expert at this, I am, pick whatever, I'm a Harvard PhD in natural language processing, and I've created this startup out of nowhere, people are like, yeah, that guy knows his shit, so I'll trust him. And they will just start anything out of nowhere. But in India, you need to have a very different flavor to that. Until that doesn't change, and this is not going to change overnight, right? So Rohit and Ankit are making the statement that we essentially need to get to a point where trust is generated over time. And through that, will a hardware company come out? Of course it will come out, right? So let me be the disagreement here. Tesla is, of course, going to come out of India, right? But maybe it will not be called Tesla, and maybe it will not be cars, and maybe it will be Aether Energy. Maybe it will be the first super bike that India needs. Maybe it will be the first drone that we will just fly in, because now who the F is going to travel from Bangalore, Indiranagar to the airport? And
That's likely to happen faster.
so I think it's just the adoption of the Indian context and the Indian culture, if you will, and that's bound to happen and bound to change.
It's very interesting because this economic survey, even Subbu has written about this, that India, yeah, Krishnamurti Subramanian, he's a professor. So.
You Niti Ayog and stuff. Right? So you may just call these people, but हमारे लिए वो anyway.
So he has also mentioned.
So what did Mr. Subramanian say?
Mr. Subramanian said that Subbu, yeah, he said that the trust as the one of the key impediments which we as a society have to cross to actually reach to this 5 trillion economy.
I have a fascinating anecdote, and I never forget this. So Ola, everyone knows of Ola at least. Ola is the equivalent of Uber in India, and it's one of those markets. In fact, I would say the only big market left where Uber still hasn't won clearly. So I was speaking to Bhavesh, who's the founder and CEO of Ola, and this was about 4 years back. There is no way that you can get to the customer care number of Uber. There's no way that you can speak to a human if you are using Uber, even in India. And Ola had a 24/7 customer care team, 487 people back in 2015 or so, when they just almost started. Guess what was the number one reason why people called the Ola customer care? What do you think was the number one reason why people called? No, not cancellation fees. Oh, how nice of you. I'd imagine it's been a very long while since you have been out of India. You remember a very different version of us.
How sweet was that?
Anyone else? Well, to get their car sooner, okay. 83% of everyone who called the Ola customer care back then had one question: where is my cab? And some product manager in Ola will be like, oh my effing God, that is what the product does. Like, you see that car moving towards you when you book, that is real. But people in 2015 were not believing it, because like, there is no way that there is a cab 3 minutes away from me. Ola is just lying. They just want me to be hooked onto it, and there's just massive trust efficiency. We just don't want to believe it. That's why most of the Indians, when we do book an Uber, the first thing we do is ask the cab driver, where are you? That is what the app does. Someone built insane technology to give you real-time information around that, but we wouldn't trust it because we just want that. And it's just these fascinating things. I have so many anecdotes, but yeah, you did a good job, MRIGANK, of chairing this session.
All right. So, I have one more question to you. Like, we see so many institutions evolving in India. You have been investor yourself. We have around 350 institutional investment firms in India as of now, and we have around similar number of accelerators there as well. How do you see this landscape evolving, and do you see that this is good enough to cater to our aspiration of 5 trillion economy as of now?
And I agree with Rohit what he said. I do not think capital is the reason why we wouldn't make it. There is no dearth of capital, and let me put the responsibility not on ourselves but on what's happening globally. Here is the fact: the Chinese economy is going to, in the next decade, create wealth that this world has not seen. It's unprecedented. The middle class is going to consume upwards of $3,000 per capita in a way that has never happened before. That creates a lot of wealth which cannot be consumed in that country. So it has to be shipped out. And the US is no longer that big a mountain where all of that money will go in. And there are only a few markets where that money will be parked. So for good or for bad, whether we like it or not, India is going to see a lot of international capital coming in over the next 2 decades. And it is now onto us what we do with it. It's never the dearth of capital. It is only our execution capability, the awareness that we have not to pick up something from the Valley or from Shanghai or Shenzhen and just dump it on the Indian context. We have to create an Indian idea with an Indian context, with the Indian flavor. And if we do that, capital is not going to be the constraint at all. I don't think so.
By the way, I just want to say this 5 trillion number we'll get to at some point for sure. It's compounding, right?
Yes.
Its question is when. And I also want to say that it will not happen only on the back of startups, right? Manufacturing has to fire, industry has to fire, bank credit has to come back on track. So it's a complicated economy. I think it's still very as real as it is, wonderful about all the. We get very misty-eyed about startups, but there's a lot of hard work needed in the economy to get to the 5 trillion mark. The question is, can we get there sooner and faster? Because at some point we thought, well, we get to 3 trillion, we're about to get there or already got there. So it's a much wider remit.
So, absolutely. So, Ankit, like I have been spending a lot of time in Ministry of Civil Aviation for past 3 years. So working on the regulations and not working on
I'm sitting between two guys who fly drones, right?
Try to fly them, yes, in India. So one is manufacturing. How about regulations? How do we approach regulations vis-a-vis US probably, and that too also with respect to new markets? Like when we approach the US, was coming out with drone policies. These guys had regulatory sandboxes, and it was facilitated. But what are your views about that?
Yeah, I think most of the things in India are knee jerk, right? I mean, we wake up and we realize that we don't understand it enough, and we'll clamp it down. Like cryptocurrency, we don't know it enough, so we've clamped it down. Drones, we don't know it enough, we've clamped it down. So in India, I think most of the policy reactions are very, very knee jerk, and right now the people don't have the mindset of creating these regulatory sandboxes and stuff like that. It's hard for them to come together to create something, and I think a lot of it will happen when people get into a mission mode around some of these things, where everybody who needs to take the decision is actually put in a room to say that this has to happen, this has to be the outcome. You figure out how, and whatever you want to tweak within your organization, you do that. If we keep giving everybody the responsibility, you figure out in your department, come back, you go out, figure out and come back, there's so many detractors, so many people who are playing it safe, that it never happens. We've been part of this journey, and we know that it doesn't move anywhere at all. And then the reactions we take to that are the most conservative reactions you can imagine. So today, for example, for flying a drone, you literally will have to connect to a server in the cloud, which will tell you whether at that location, at that point in time, are you allowed to fly your system or not. And only when you get a permission from it will you be actually able to take off at all. The manufacturer is supposed to. But now it's the right. By the way, it's the right legislation in the one sense that for the security concerns that the country has, it is the right thing to do, because there is a trust deficit, and we have as individuals done enough to feed into that trust deficit in general, and that's the reason why. And plus, we have porous borders. We have to be very cognizant of the fact that we have relatively porous borders. The threat is real and happens every day to us at some point in time or the other. So I'm not saying that the regulations are wrong, but I think the way we approach them, the way we look at development, we try to clamp down too much in a blanket. We should actually allow a certain risk friendly zone which allows people to experiment and build technologies. I think some of these clampdowns are not exciting, but we should open it up a little bit. But
I think implementation was a bit of a problem there, like the
as well,
the mindset
as well
was
as
yeah.
that, yeah. As well as, and enforcement in India is really brilliant. Like there is no enforcement. So we have a law that clamps it down, but they fly in every wedding out there. Every wedding out there. You're not a wedding photographer anymore if you don't have a drone flying for the wedding. So that's how enforcement is in India.
They have to, but they don't.
Yeah, that's enforcement, right?
So, Ankur, I have to ask this question to you. What is let the build up be, yes. So what is that unsolvable challenge you are secretly working on?
I have no idea, which is why it's unsolvable. I have no idea. The reference that MRIGANK's making is, after I stepped down as the CEO of my startup, I was deciding on what to do for the next decade, and I've consciously chosen that whatever idea I do has to have a very high probability of failure. Otherwise, it's not worth it. So I don't know. I'm okay
we can
with that.
discuss.
Yeah, yeah.
I have a lot of them.
Great. Okay. I am sure. I'm seeking
Take
it.
my idea. I'm not using it.
Last panel discussion, I was told by both of you that implementation is the key. I remember that. So, what about the culture, like overall, like in terms of, although we have discussed about it, but do you see that startup culture changing? There is much more acceptability, yes, but in terms of going forward, do you see that accelerating in terms of acceptability?
Massively. I think that's one big shift which has already happened. So that people just want to work for startups. Companies don't see if you've been exited from a startup or failed in a startup as an issue at all. It's seen as a plus point. So that change on the talent side is very rapid and very global in nature in India today. I see that happening.
It is. I think it is just now started to go to the second tier cities, and as that penetration goes up higher, it'll be interesting. So when we started, any second tier city parent would basically scoff at you and not want you to do this. So you literally have to go against them to do this because their biggest fear is शादी नहीं होगी इसकी. इसलिए अगर शादी नहीं हुई है तो
Actually the place to see this is TikTok, right? So if you go to TikTok and see the stars coming from tier 2, tier 3, tier 4, like ignore your sensibilities for a second, right? And what goes on happening. But like if I suspend my judgment on that, there are people who are just rocking it, right? And they're coming from all parts of the country. The second place is cricket, actually, where most of the cricketers are now coming from towns which the Bombay club is broken completely. Yeah. So I think that change is real and happening, and that's so wonderful to see.
But building startup ecosystem in tier 2 cities and nascent places is a very difficult task. Like, and not in terms of culture and in terms of the sheer critical mass of human capital also, which has to be deployed. Like, it is a lot about people and not about infrastructure as well.
Yeah, but I think we shouldn't confuse saying where did the startup got built to which market does it serve, right? So even in most developed countries, startups going to get built in every small town or village, right? It's not true for the US as well, right? So that is not the moot point. The moot point is, are people from there coming up and doing it? Answer is yes. Are startups going back and serving those markets? Answer is yes. So Flipkart recently announced that they now deliver to every pin code in India. That's insane, right? We are much smaller geographically, but we go to about 415 towns. That's when I go to the last town, it's quite striking that that is being served by us. I've never gone there before, right? So that change is real, but it'll stay concentrated in top maybe 12, 15 cities. That's okay.
Okay. I think a good way of thinking about this, MRIGANK, is if you go to a tier 2, tier 3 city today in India, you'll be shocked pleasantly the percentage of young people who are working in startups.
Yes.
From a Uber guy to an Ola to a Zomato delivery to a Swiggy to maybe an Oyo entrepreneur or Oyopreneur as you call them to anyone else, which is it's fascinating. I love the branding, but it's very encouraging because there for someone who graduated out of college or maybe even didn't finish college, the only thing for them was to either sit at their dad's shop or to go back to farming as a bonded, most likely laborer or a contractor, or to move to the cities. And for the first time in almost 5-6 years, they can sit and earn respectfully. And that is a massive inflection point. And then they can use their time to be on TikTok, which is just a whoa.
So last year,
and I think
there's a real story. Last year I was in Rajasthan, right? And went to a village, we were vacationing and went to a village driving there, which had no electricity. One of the few to be still done, maybe. And the fascinating part was everybody had a smartphone there. Women. So my first question was, how do you charge this thing? There's no electricity here. And then I realized what an ecosystem India is, right? So the way it gets charged is two ways. One, car batteries. They figured out a way of using car batteries to charge mobile phones. The second way is the nearest village where there is electricity. A person comes on a scooter, collects all the mobile phones, charges 10 rupees for the charging, takes them to the other city. It's charged by the evening and delivered back to this village. right? With full guarantee and trust. It blew my mind, right? Seeing women who were like full parda and all that, and not like socially not that forward, they were all having smartphones. They have seen those serials. The network was working, so telecom network is way ahead of the electricity network sometimes in India. And that change, 450 million people on smartphone going to about 750 million in next 3 years, is just stunning. I think what that is doing to the country in terms of reach is phenomenal.
Absolutely. And I think I just wanted to add a point that, all the small towns usually had a huge aversion to risk. Like if you go to any small town, the families have absolute, failure is looked akin to death in those communities, right? And that acceptance that failure is an option for entrepreneurs, I think that's going to be the biggest transformation that the country will have, that, failure is all right, because genuinely they don't believe in failure at all. I mean, if they lose money, they feel like, they've really lost it. And that, I think, is slowly becoming more tolerant. And when that happens, we will see a huge inflection in entrepreneurship.
Very interesting. I think now we'll open the panel for the audiences to ask questions. You need my mic?
Hi, thank you all for being here and sharing your wonderful stories with us. So we may all may agree that the greatest asset required to scale any startup or any company is the human resource. So my question is that as successful leaders in your spaces, how have you managed to acquire and retain the right talent? And yeah, just a few examples of what has worked for you and what hasn't worked for you to get the right kind of people on board who fit into your culture and just to take things forward. Thank you.
So still figuring it out, honestly. But a few things which have changed dramatically in that sense. One is there is millennials are, by the way, sort of they're Gen Z now, and the biggest challenge is to find people who can bridge as managers the millennials and the Gen Z, because the behaviors are very different, right? And understanding and not judging is the key first. Second is the complete notion of hierarchy is breaking down, and thank God for that, in a major way. So one anecdote I can share with you, not in Oyo but in my previous company, one very young person came to me and was upset about her boss, right? And I said, in usual style, saying कि senior hai, koi baat nahi, sun lo baat. Like, I'll translate it, but it has to be in vernacular first. And she says, वो director होंगे अपने घर पे होंगे, मेरे लिए क्या value add किया है, right? Which is to say that if you're just senior, no longer is relevant. What value do you add to my life and my work on a daily basis? So that challenge is very welcome, because it's allowing and forcing leaders now to be A, authentic, B, really not care about what the designation is, but care about what value they add to their organizations and people on a daily basis. And C, I think also to be forced to learn every day new things. And this combination of leadership, if you can create in the organization, allows you to recruit more people and retain them. And lastly, the whole old adage saying A players recruit A players and B players recruit C players, right? Always holds. So that I think is not out of fashion yet. So simple things. I don't think it's that complicated. Just level of not judging and understanding young talent is very, very key.
Yeah, for us, we don't recruit as much, but whatever we do recruit has to be very, very relevant and has to be very, very high quality. So we are the other end of the spectrum. And it's hard to attract because we are in Mumbai, and Delhi and Bangalore are the two basic talent hubs, if you may call it. But you find your groove, right? I mean, you have a brilliant guy who wants to come back to be near his family, so you get that guy, even if he's working with Samsung or whatever. Plus, also it helps to be in a industry that sounds sexy. Right now, drones are sexy, so people want to work for drones. But yeah, I think that's probably the two areas where it's somewhere some hardware companies are people's heart desire, right? I mean, most of us grow up like loving automobiles or whatever it is, right? Or aerospace, or most of us have fascination for the armed forces as well. So somewhere I think people connect with that calling in them and are still able to come and work with us. But yes, it's hard to find a very very high quality talent because people don't have that kind of experience we are looking for, because we don't do as much in-depth engineering in a lot of industries in our country at this point in time still.
So thank you very much for being here. My question is, how can we increase the failure tolerance of a community? That community can be Babson, can be Boston, can be Mumbai. But how can we do that? Thank you.
Yeah.
No, please. Oh. You said more, go on.
Oh yeah. That's true. That's true.
I thought you would.
Nowhere close. I thought you have an answer. No. So to be honest, failure is I think finding enough people in your life who don't put you down for failing in doing something is, I think, it's a privilege. It's not an easy thing in, I think, any community where people don't point out your mistakes and they tell you that I can strip away the medals, but I cannot take the experience away from you. I think you need more and more people like that in your mentors. And I was extremely privileged. I remember in my sixth standard, I drew a perpetual motion machine and I went to one of my teachers and said that, do you think it'll work? And she was like, I can't tell you why it won't work right now. You may not get it, but please continue thinking this way. And I think that simple conversation with a teacher in a small town is what kept my curiosity alive for however long I've been been around. So I think if we don't find such people, and it's hard in small towns to find such peoples, but I think when you will see enough people survive despite failure, and you will see enough people, as the entrepreneurial ecosystem continues to evolve, more startups come in, and significantly more will fail. I think that tolerance will, increase when people will say that failure doesn't lead to death. And that's what it is akin to actually in society. So that momentum is what will build on it. I don't see a very specific way in which it will happen. Maybe success stories will attract people enough. Maybe more unicorns will attract people to take that risk, which otherwise they know that their own kids will not have an option to grow as big, right? Everyone has those aspirations.
But I must say, failing has become so fashionable that it's okay to succeed as well.
Thank you. Yeah. So there are essentially two ways of dealing with this. One is, of course, you do it the way Ankit's teacher did way back when he was a student, which is to encourage people to fail and to not make it into a taboo. But of course, that's the hardest piece to do because you're essentially changing the entire cultural fabric of how a community builds around itself. I feel what India is most likely going to do, or at least I hope that's happening, is you encourage enough people who've succeeded to speak very actively and openly about how much they've failed, because that gives other people the confidence and the motivation, and also the realization that I thought that this individual was near perfect, and I thought that they had such a brilliant life where everything that they did was just check, 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 check. And now I recognize that they have failed and failed enough. So it gives me the confidence that if I am at times facing obstacles, it's not so much of the end game. And the good thing where I have hope is we are a culture around storytelling. Unfortunately, it's mostly the victories and the wars and everything that we've fought. But if we could just encourage an entire generation to say, what storytelling can also be about failures and how much you have failed, and despite that, where you are, that would be a bigger shift.
Hi, thank you so much. First of all, congratulations each of you for what you have made yourself, that becoming inspiring, and thank you coming to Babson. Before coming here, the one thing we realize is mentorship. I did not realize when I was back in India and trying to do something, but after coming to Babson and going through the process, that's a very important thing that you learn. I was thinking about, can you guide us, like, wow, you are representing the ecosystem of a startup in India. So can you guide us like what's the mentorship ecosystem right now? Like if I go back and I'm trying to do something, so what's the access to not the capital, but the mentorship? I think that's really very crucial. How I can access that mentorship, and you being already there, I think Ankur, I was seeing your profile. You are like angel investor or maybe something you're guiding. Are you all are doing something? So somebody going back, is the system exist for getting access to mentorship?
Thank you for the question. I think it's a very important one. So one, there isn't any very organized formal mentorship network in India as yet. It's becoming so. But in my experience of having been one and also working immensely, there are three things that I would leave you with. One is the big mistake that I made early on was to seek a mentor with the hope that he or she will fix all my problems or at least be an active member of all my problems. And that's a very unfair, very unreasonable expectation from someone, because what is the likelihood that someone will be just as good that they will be able to navigate through all of what I'm going through? So the one thing that I've done, and it's helped me a lot, is I seek mentors in different aspects of my life. So I would have a mentor for my money matters, for my hiring matters, for my culture matters, for my growth matters, for my marketing matters, and so on and so forth. And I will seek their opinion so that there is a fair exchange of expectation. The second, which is perhaps the biggest realization for me, is I thought that if I want to start up and I am a aspiring entrepreneur in India, who should be my mentor? And it's like, oh, it should be someone at the level of Vijay Shekhar Sharma of Paytm, or it has to be someone at Azim Premji of Wipro. But that is such a wrong way of thinking about mentors, because when you think of the best people as your mentors, what they have done is already crystallize in their head to the extent that they're never able to dumb it down to your level. So they will always be acting as, oh, of course, this is so obvious. Why should I even state it? But it won't be obvious to you. So my mentors are almost peers. They just come from a very different mindset. They come from a very different experience, very different worldview. So they don't tend to agree with me more often. But they are just going through the same things. They're almost my age. And that has been a big shift in how I see it. Which brings you to the third point, that I actively seek mentors only if they have a very different point of view from mine. Because I will never learn anything from anyone who says yes to me. I will never. But I need someone who's saying, no, you could be wrong, or this is not perhaps the right way of thinking about it. And I would love that to come from my friend who was in college, love that to come from Rohit or Ankit or MRIGANK, all of whom are much older to me, and I'm so young and everything like that. But no, it's fascinating, and we continue to learn from each other so much, and that's because they're going through perhaps the same struggles, but look at it very differently from what it is. And if your question is how do you find mentors, there is no simple answer to that, and there'll never be, and I hope there isn't, because if you would just go to a marketplace and buy a mentor, most likely that is a horrible mentor to buy. You have to actively make someone one. Like it's almost like the guru philosophy that we have in the Indian culture. You have to find, but that shouldn't be like the karta dharta of your entire life, but just pockets.
It's very interesting that, and this is something which I've learned from from this discussion, that mentorship is a very personally driven initiative. You have to be very active and take your own initiatives to find mentors. But at the same time, accelerators are also a point of contact where you actually get mentors in terms. And these are very rightly said. These are not the people who are looking for money. They are people who are willing to give back. So best things in life, what I've realized is that you will get for free. Because if that motivation is there for people to actually be associated with you in terms of monetary aspects, then being mentoring you would be a bit of a problem. That's an obstruction.
And I actually support, building upon that, I actually support what he was saying in his third point, which is that, the best mentors are people in your peer group who are going through a very, very similar struggle. Because when you learn from doers, actually, you don't learn from, people who propound gyan. You learn from people you believe have gone through the journey and have seen that pain, have experienced that pain, and can, to some extent, empathize with you and give you how they solve the problem and open your mind. It's very hard to learn from a guru, because his context of that knowledge and that information may be very different from your context, and his level, like he mentioned, may be very, very different from where you are. So if that is not matching, it's very hard to learn. And I am saying that because I actually have a couple of these forums that I'm a part of. There's this forum in Mumbai called Ascent, where you basically form a group of entrepreneurs who are in a pretty much similar journey with very diverse fields, no competition. And when you go and bounce off your ideas in that environment openly about anything, including having struggled with your co-founders or whatever, you actually, when you hear others share their journey, that's when you learn the most. They open up your mind, and when you see them grow and evolve with you, that's when you get also motivated in solving your problems or thinking differently. It's very hard to just follow what somebody is given as God's gospel. It doesn't work, at least for an entrepreneur, easily.
I find a very stressed young lady out here.
You guys are staying too far behind.
Okay. Just one question. It may or may not be relevant to what you're doing right now, but in terms of corporate citizenship, like corporate social citizenship or giving back, it's pretty relevant in US. We see that. I work in HR, so pretty much involved in that. But coming in from India and the startup company, there's a lot of new companies coming up, and that forms a job for like you said, they're going to smaller cities, they're creating jobs. But what is it that like Tata has done a lot of things like that, but for the new Indian work system, what is it like, and what is the culture like for corporate citizenship?
I think there are two aspects to it. First of all, the employees today want to see the company being socially responsible. So there is a very natural imperative from a talent retention standpoint to create a system where they can participate in doing something. Everybody wants a higher purpose than their job, right? So that is a great force multiplier. It is giving a very logical enough rationale to entrepreneurs to go down that path. Just to give an example, we realized we are a very local business. So we picked up a project where we said that not just our hotels, 300 of our hotels in the next 2 months, we're going to make sure that the outside is clean and green. Simple as that. So do something which you can impact straight away rather than trying to say that I'll just solve that very large problem and nothing short of that will help. So companies are starting to do it. I think they're doing it. And look, also, there are a lot of new companies, young companies, which are in the social enterprise space, so-called, which are solving very real problems, which are helping. So waste management, things like that. It's really the big impact is coming from the small companies and not necessarily only the large companies now.
Hi, my name is Nukul. Hi, thanks for the really enlightening discussion. Really useful for us to learn about your experiences. As a founder of 2 failed startups, I had a question about, I think the core question is starting up again, more than starting up, because a lot of the startups, as we know, fail. And Ankit, you spoke about the ecosystem for that. I wanted to know, as students, we hear a lot of talk around passion and following your passion, and then we are here in the MBA trying to find what it is. Can each one of you share one instance where you didn't follow your passion, but followed an opportunity in your careers, and then it became a passion? And is it possible, in your opinion, that something is a genuine opportunity and your pragmatic self feels that it's worth pursuing, and then you feel that you will develop the passion for it?
So my honest my take is following your passion is the most overrated advice. Right? It is just sounds very great and nice, and so people spew it all the time incessantly, right? I think it's led to fairly in India at least led to strong sense of entitlement, right? As if solve. So nobody wants to start, everyone wants to end. If I'm not solving like India's like space problem right now, I'm like, I might as well die, right? So there is a little bit of a correction needed there in terms of every success story was 5 years in the making at least, right? That realization is very key. At least I come from a very middle class background where we worked our way up, and I know no other way. So maybe it's my own limitation. But I personally am much more of an opportunist.
put me in a situation, I'll try to get the best out of it.
I think, overall, there is always pain in what you're doing, right? I mean, you have to genuinely, you're not always solving the world's biggest problem. Sometimes you're just solving shitty people problems, or, technology is stuck and you have no idea where it's going to go. And, you don't want to spend all your days in just building that one circuit, right? So you have to find that motivation within yourself. A little bit of where passion helps is that if you like what you're doing, and the bigger picture, you basically stick around doing it. That's where passion helps. Otherwise you don't stick around doing that same thing. That's all.
I'd say my short answer is, I use passion as a eligibility but not as a selection criteria. So whatever I select has to be driven by its market size, blanket. That's it. It has to be a big opportunity, because at least I feel that my time needs to go towards a big opportunity. And then I will layer on my passion to make it eligible or not. But my selection will never be driven by my passion. I couldn't agree more with Rohit that when you given the advice, scratch your own itch. Who cares about your itch, right? It's your itch. So why would I? The right question is, how many people are itching with the same problem, and are they itching enough so as to be willing to pay for that to be solved? And if that answer is nowhere close, then no, my passion is just going to make my itch seem far bigger than what it is.
That's so true. That's so true. It has to be large enough. Without that, there's no.
So I think it's all about passionately, finding opportunities and solving them. so, so thank you guys. Thank you guys for sharing your deep insight into the nuances of startup ecosystem in India. And I think we have already exceeded our time and have received multiple.
Can we have a huge round of applause for our panel? We will start the next session in a few minutes. Yeah. Fine. So this is pretty much. So I shall go ahead and introduce the guests. Yeah. So I'll do some basics. So I'll introduce Preeti, I'll introduce Sanjay, and I'll have a small note on you as well. And then I'll just leave it on to you, and you can take it. Fair enough. Yeah. Yeah. So I'll do that. Yeah.
Start to see time. So let me cancel the question.
Ladies and gentlemen, we will start the next session shortly, so please settle down. We're just check. Hello. Yes.